Hey, welcome back. We're in Genesis 25 to 27, and we are continuing through the story of Abraham and his family, the first family that was called by God. We read in Genesis 25, verse 19, that this is the account of the family line of Abraham's son, Isaac. So if this is your first time tuning in to hear from our Genesis series, then you know that we're focused on this specific family, the family of Abraham. That's really the entire second half of the book of Genesis. And the second half of Genesis follows these major names throughout the remaining chapters. You've got Abraham, his son Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. So this is 4 generations. These 4 men are often referred to as the patriarchs of Israel. And so really the second half of Genesis is the story of this family's faith relationship with God and the ways in which they were used to found the nation of Israel. But if you're looking at this, you might be thinking to yourself, why does this family matter so much? After all, there have been many famous families that have had a big impact on the world and on people's lives. So why is this ancient book so preoccupied with this particular group of nomads? Well, to remind you of where we've come from, in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, we read that God spoke to Abraham and he said, I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. And so really, it's not just about this family. It may seem like it's focused on these guys. It's not just even about the nation that they would someday found, but it says that all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. The story that we're reading is really the story of the beginning of God's plan of redemption for the entire world. And so what happens with this family is representative of what God wants to do with all people of all time. And that's what we're supposed to learn as we study this particular group of people. Well, we're continuing, and tonight and also next week we'll be learning about Abraham's grandson named Jacob. We read that his son Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, he's married now, because she was childless, and the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. So Abraham is gone by this time, he's passed away, and Isaac has his own family. His wife, Rebekah, is childless, which is a theme throughout the book of Genesis and actually throughout the entire Bible of childless women becoming miraculously pregnant in response to the power of God. Kind of a cool thing. We don't have time to unpack that fully tonight. But Rebekah becomes pregnant. But as she was pregnant, she began to experience the babies jostling inside of her because she was pregnant with twins. And so she asked God, why is this happening to me? She felt confused by the fact that there was just like this strange fight almost happening, like there was a royal rumble going down inside of her womb. You can imagine what this would have been like. Imagine going in to get the ultrasound to see your babies for the first time, and one of them has the other one in a headlock, right? You probably look at the ultrasound and think to yourself, that might be a bad sign. I wonder why they're doing that. Well, apparently, this was foreshadowing of the kind of relationship that these 2 boys would have. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So he gives Rebekah insight into what her son's relationship is going to be like. And it's being foreshadowed by the struggle happening even within the womb. Well, when the time came for her to give birth, there were 2 twin boys in her womb. And the first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, and so they named him Esau. Not necessarily a looker. But then his brother Jacob came out, and with his hand he grasped Esau's heel, and so he was named Jacob, which that name translates to be a supplanter, and has the idea of being like a swindler of some kind. Kind of an odd thing to name your kid, but that's what they named him. We read that Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. Well, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter. He was a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. And so right at the beginning of the story, we begin to get the picture that these boys are very different people. Esau is literally Conan the Barbarian. Like Conan was probably based off of Esau in a real sense. I mean, he's all brawn. He's out there in the wilderness. He's a hunter. He's walking toxic masculinity, right? That's Esau. But on the other hand, you got Jacob, and Jacob, it's not that he's not manly, but he's just more of like a Timothy Chalamet type manly. He's yeah, he still might be able to fight. He can do some things. He's real smart, but I don't know. He's the kind of guy that really takes really good care of his hair. He cares about what he looks like, pays attention to his clothes. They're just really not the same at all. What we're going to see is that Jacob is defined more by his wit, while Esau is defined more by his brawn. Well, we read that Isaac had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Man, this is sad to read. Right off the bat, we see that there is dysfunction that's taken root in this family. Isaac favors Esau and Rebekah favors Jacob. That's very painful. If you've grown up in a home where one parent obviously favors one of your siblings, then you know what that feels like. I remember that when I was in my early 20s, and my brother was going to law school, and I was just really focused on living a lifestyle of ministry here in Columbus. I sensed that my parents were more proud of my brother for going to law school. And that was very painful for me. That was something that I had to work through. It impacted me and my brother's relationship, which was already competitive. And what we're going to see is that definitely sets the stage for the kind of relationship these two boys are going to have. It's a contentious one. Well, we read that once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. And he said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stuff. I'm famished." Esau wasn't exactly known for his eloquence, as you can see. Red stuff is the literal translation of the Hebrew. He doesn't say, "Give me some of your soup or your stew." He says, "I want that red stuff." So yeah, he is a walking stereotype, to be sure. Well, Jacob replies, "Okay, first, sell me your birthright." Whoa, full stop. This is one of those places where a modern audience could just read past this and be like, that's strange. But if you were an ancient person reading this, you would be shocked. You'd be flabbergasted. You'd be like, what? Sell him your birthright? This isn't just typical sibling bartering, right? I mean, when I was a kid, me and my siblings would fight over things like who gets shotgun. Or I might give my brother my last cookie so that I could choose what TV show to watch that night or something like that. But when he says, "Sell me your birthright," he's talking about the family inheritance that was rightfully Esau's by virtue of ancient customs. We know this from ancient artifacts we've discovered. These are called the Nuzi tablets, and it's these hundreds and hundreds of etched stone which records the customs, the traditions, and all sorts of different details about what life was like in the ancient Near East. And these tablets confirm many of the things that we read in the Bible. We know that a birthright, this was something which was legal, this was something that was meaningful. It was the way in which a family name, family blessings, and wealth was passed from generation to generation. And so Jacob is basically doing the equivalent of looking Esau in the eye and saying, "Yeah, man, you can have some of my soup, but when Dad dies, I want you to give me everything that you inherit, okay? Like, sell me your soul." It's a pretty heavy thing. But Esau goes for it. He says, "Look, I'm about to die," said Esau. "What good is a birthright to me?" Wow. Talk about only caring about what's right in front of you. Well, in case you were thinking that Jacob was just joking around, apparently not. He says, "Swear it to me. Swear to me first." And then so Esau swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread, some lentil stew. He ate and he drank, then he got up and he left. Wow. Well, we read Esau then despised his birthright. Oftentimes in the story of Genesis, we don't get commentary from the author about what's going on, but this is one of those places. He says Esau despised his birthright. Your birthright was not the kind of thing that you should just give away. It was something abstract, at least it seemed abstract for Esau at the time, because it was so far away, but it was one of the most significant things about who he was. But he just gave it up. He traded it like it was nothing. This would be like going to Wendy's and being like, I don't really have any money, but I'll give you my social security card for that 4 for $4. That 4 for $4 is right there, man. Junior bacon cheeseburger all the way. This piece of paper, this social security card, they say I might need it someday, to apply for college or to get a loan or a mortgage. But what good is that to me now? And so you just give it away. Side point, I actually have no idea where my social security card is. I lost it like 15 years ago, and to this day, I have no idea where it is. So hopefully no one's out there stealing my identity. Side point. Moving on. We also read that when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and also Basemath, how about that for a name, daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they were a source of grief to both Isaac and Rebekah. So he brought these non-believing women into their home, and this was a source of grief for his parents. This is an important detail because it tells us that this wasn't an isolated decision for Esau to just sell away his birthright. He apparently was just not really a moral or spiritual guy in general, and that bears out in the women that he chose to marry as well. Well, the story's not over. Time goes on, and we read that when Isaac was old and his eyes were weak so he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his son, and said to him, "My son, here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I'm now an old man. Go get your equipment, your quiver, your bow. Go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare for me that tasty food that I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Side point about Isaac, this dude is really into food. It says that he favored Esau because of his food, because of the fact that he could hunt and make good food. And then also, now he's dying, and he's like, what's the last thing that I want? I want really good food. I mean, I get it, dude. Like, that goat looks pretty good, but this is apparently the defining feature of Isaac's life. We don't know much about Isaac, but he really loved food. Well, Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, and Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game, bring me some food. I'm ready to give you my blessing.' So she says, 'Now listen, my son, carefully. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 young goats, and I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies.'" Man, the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree, does it? We kind of see where Jacob gets it. Yeah, he's kind of a swindler, but that probably wasn't just his nature. There was some nurture there too. Rebekah seems like she's cut from the same cloth. But Jacob notices a wrench in the plan. He says to his mother, "Mom, my brother Esau is a hairy man. Well, I have smooth skin. I'm the kind of guy that moisturizes, you know? I'm Timothy Chalamet. What will happen when he touches me?" He says, "I would appear to be tricking him and would bring a curse on myself rather than a blessing." But his mom said to him, No, don't worry about it. Just go do what I say and get them for me." So Jacob goes and gets them. He brings them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food, just the way Isaac liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her son, and she put them on her younger son, Jacob. She also covered his hands and smooth parts of his neck with goat skins. Wow, Esau must have been really hairy if that ruse was going to pass. And then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread that she had made. He went to his father and said, "Father." "Yes, my son," Isaac answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. This is kind of slimy when you think about it. Notice that Jacob doesn't say, "My God gave me success." He says, "Your God gave me success." Apparently, Jacob and God don't have too much going on at this point. That might be the reason why Jacob feels okay using God's name to manipulate his dying dad. Oh my God. Well, Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, and know whether or not you are really my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Isaac must be really losing it at this point. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" Just checking one more time. "I am," said Jacob in his best baritone. Then he said, "My son, bring some of your game to eat, that I may give you my blessing." When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "The smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed." Yeah, apparently that smell of like dead animals and sweat, body odor. He's like, that's my son. Gotta be Esau, definitely Esau. Jacob smells like lavender. This is definitely Esau. He says, "May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. May the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. That line, by the way, is a direct quote from the promise that God made to Abraham. And so this is not just the committing of the family estate. This is also the committing of the very promise of God that was given to Abraham and then was given to Isaac. Well, after Isaac finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, he goes out the back door. Esau comes in the front. He came in from hunting, and he too had prepared some tasty food. He brought it to his father. And he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my games, that you may give me your blessing." But his father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I'm your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed, he will be blessed." So this part might seem a little bit silly to us. Like, why doesn't Isaac just take it back and give it to Esau instead? Be like, dude, you don't get to do that. Now I realize it was the wrong brother, so now I'm going to just give it to Esau. Once again, when we look at the ancient records, we know that this is how it worked. These oral deathbed wills were highly significant. When you gave your official blessing, it was the equivalent of writing and signing a document in the presence of a lawyer. This was, in a world without paper, without lawyers, without banks and whatnot, this was the way that they handled things. And so this was irrevocable. It was not something which could be taken back. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has stolen your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob?" So Esau is bitter about what's happened. "This is the second time he's taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." We read that Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, "When the days of mourning my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for Jacob and said to him, "Esau is planning to kill you. Now then, my son, do what I say and flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides." Well, that's where the story of Jacob is going to leave off for tonight. But our purpose tonight is not really to talk about Jacob, because Jacob is the subject of Doug's teaching next week. We're going to find all about what happens to Jacob and the way in which God deals with him. But tonight we need to focus in on Esau, because really Esau is what this specific chapter is all about. You see, Esau is a guy we don't get too much more information about after this event. But if you go all the way to the New Testament, to the book of Hebrews, you'll read this evaluation of Esau. The author of Hebrews says, "Make sure that no one among you is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn for a single meal. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit his blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done." So we see that Esau regretted what he did. He was sorry for it. In fact, if we fast forward later in Esau's life, we see that Esau appears to be a believer in God towards the end of his life. But yet, while he was sorry for it, he could not take it back. He made a choice that radically changed the course of his life. And some people read this and they think to themselves, this seems contradictory to what the rest of the Bible teaches, because isn't God all about forgiveness? If God is the God of second chances, of third chances, of fourth chances, then why is it that Esau couldn't have a second chance to be a part of God's plan? Well, it is true that God is the God of forgiveness. We read that anyone at any time from any place can turn back to God. John 6:37 says, "The one who comes to me, I will not cast him out." That's a blanket statement of God's love and acceptance for anyone who walks through the door. But it's important for us to understand that this story isn't explicitly about forgiveness. Esau appears later, like I said, to be a believer in God. He was forgiven. What the story is really teaching us, more than anything, is that we can make consequential decisions as people created in the image of God. God has given us the power of free will, and that's quite a power, a dignity, but also something weighty that God has placed in our hands. And so while we can be repentant and be forgiven by God, And God can be gracious to us and show us mercy and use us despite the choices that we've made. It doesn't always mean that we get to dodge the consequences of the choices that we make. Our decisions can be gravely consequential in this life. Now, we see that Esau suffered the consequences of his decision. But what about Jacob? Jacob was the deceiver. It's not like he was the morally better person in the story. Why would God choose to use him? That's a fair question. We got to answer that before we go any further. For one thing, we see that God originally chose Jacob. It was actually Isaac who preferred Esau. Back in verse 23, we see that God said from the outset that Jacob would be greater than Esau, that he would be the one through whom he would work. So it was really Isaac's favoritism that set Esau up for this, not God's choice, because God originally had chosen to work through Jacob. We also see that God works through and around people's free will choices. He knew that this is what was going to happen. It's not necessarily a commentary on Esau versus Jacob. Both those guys were corrupt in their own ways, but God chose to work through the things that he knew would happen. We know that God doesn't choose anyone because they're more righteous. When God chooses to work through someone, or when God chooses to move towards someone, it's not because of the good things that they do. It's because God can sovereignly choose to work through anyone he likes. It's in his mercy that he chooses to use anybody. It's not just the good people and the bad people. Jacob, of course, is not really one of the good people. What we're going to see is that God is not done with Jacob. He's going to have his own way of dealing with Jacob that's pretty intense, actually. He actually blesses and takes care of Esau, and he also blesses and takes care of Jacob. But Jacob has his own path, which will be the subject of next week's teaching. For now, we just need to focus on Esau and the decision that he made and what exactly it meant. Esau made an impulsive decision. Not only was it an impulsive decision to trade away something so important for something so temporary, but it was also an exaggerated decision. Remember what he said? He said, "I'm going to die if I don't eat some of that red stuff right now." He wasn't going to die. Clearly, he was able to have a conversation with his brother. Jacob didn't find him laying on the side of the road. He ate the stew and he went on his way. He didn't spend 3 days being nursed back to health. He was not going to die. He also might have thought that he could take it back. This might have been an insincere oath that he made. He might have thought to himself like, okay, Jacob, you can have my birthright. But he may have been thinking to himself like, Jacob's a weakling. I can just beat him up and take it back when the time comes. Who cares? He might have thought that his oath didn't matter because Jacob was weak, but he forgot that when you make a promise, when you make an oath, you also make it before God. And so ultimately what we see with Esau is that Esau was rationalizing his way out of doing what was right, out of following God. And before we wax too judgmental of Esau, we should remember that you and I, we do the same thing. We trade the eternal for the temporary. We trade what is fulfilling and what is good for the thing that we can have right now. We go for something like a one-night stand, sacrificing peace of mind, peace of heart, and also just a stable relationship with God for temporary pleasure. We do things like binge Netflix and YouTube instead of going out and connecting and relating with God's people. Taking in a positive way from the spiritual things that God has to give us. And so we make these kinds of choices all the time. This is how we are also tempted to sin. Yeah, when you think about the soup, something instant, fleeting, physical, seen, and cheap, it's right there. But the birthright was distant. It was eternal, it was spiritual, it was unseen, and ultimately it was priceless. And that trade-off, as foolish as it seems from a bird's eye view, is a trade-off that we make all the time. What is the soup in your life that you trade away the greater things of God for? It's a mark of a wise person that you're able to see beyond the moment, beyond the physical, to the things that stand behind that, to the things that bring real fulfillment and peace, the things that bring the best things in life and even for eternity. Those are the things that should orient our biggest decisions in life. Well, free will is a powerful thing. God has given us this incredible and terrible, but also amazing ability to make choices that change everything. Now, it is true that some decisions just don't matter at all, right? Like all fast food places are basically the same with the sole exception of Long John Silver's. That place is from hell. The rest is all the same, ultimately. It really is. Ironically, we spend so much time fretting over decisions that are ultimately inconsequential. Like whether you're an Apple or an Android person, whether you get a Pixel, or whether you use a dumb phone, in the grand scheme of things, that choice doesn't matter at all, right? But yet it's something which we spend tons of time on. So many choices don't matter, but some choices matter a ton. They matter a lot. And this can be true even of impulsive decisions. When I was 16, I was at a park playing basketball with some friends. And this group of guys came up. And one of the guys was this bigger guy. We were the same age, but he was known at Whetstone at the time as this guy who was like the biggest fighter, the dude that you did not want to mess with. And they started playing basketball with us. And this guy started messing with me. He started kind of pushing me around, being rough with me, calling me names and stuff. And in a split instant, I don't even know what it was. Like I was fine. Suddenly I snapped and I straight up Batman slapped this dude. I cocked back and I just cracked him across the face with an open hand slap. Except for, in this case, it'd be more like Robin slapping Batman because this guy was like twice my size, way tougher and way meaner. Suffice to say, that was an impulsive but yet consequential decision. I'm not going to finish the story, but it probably doesn't take too much imagination for you guys to think about how it ended. I couldn't take it back. It was irrevocable. But there are even bigger decisions in life that will change not just our afternoon, but will change the course of our entire lives. Who you marry, for instance, that's a big deal. That's one reason why who you give your heart to now matters. Because, if that relationship continues, or if you continue to be with people like that, then that's going to form ultimately the kind of a person you choose to be with long term. What if you marry someone who doesn't care about God? Or God is not the number one thing in their life, but you want it to be the number one thing in yours and for your family? Man, that decision could just put a ceiling over what you are able to do for God, or the scope of the ways in which you can serve God throughout the course of your life. What you do after high school, very consequential. Whether you stay here for school, whether you go somewhere else, whether thinking about your walk with God is an essential part of what you do in that next step of life. Many people think they can just put their walk with God on a shelf and then pick it back up whenever they want. But that's often not how it works. When we start our lives down one path, we often find ourselves pot committed. We've gone too far. And even though we could technically go back and serve God, we find it very difficult to do so, and we have not been for a very long time. You think about money. I've got friends who, fresh out of school, took out a bunch of personal loans. Now they're $10,000, $20,000, in one case $80,000 in debt in their early 20s. And that debt is going to determine many things about their lives, where they can live, what kind of jobs they have to have. Those decisions that were made in an afternoon are still impacting their lives today. Our words, what we say to people, can change relationships. It can make relationships go away, or can cause new relationships to begin. And then more important than any of these things is a relationship with God. Whether or not we choose to accept the free gift of God for a relationship with Him through Jesus Christ, or whether we choose to reject it. Some of us think that's just a matter of fulfillment in this life. That's not the case. Whether or not we start a relationship with God is one of the most important decisions we will ever make if there is indeed life after death. How do you know that you'll go to heaven? How do you know that God will accept you into His presence when this life is done? You should probably figure that out. And if there's an answer, if there is a God, and if there is life after death, then that question matters so much. And God is offering the free gift of forgiveness. He wants a relationship with you today. And whether or not you say yes or no is ultimately the most important decision of your entire life. But God has given you and I the free will to decide whether or not that's something that we want. That's powerful. Scary, but powerful. Can't God bless us, though, even when we choose against Him? If we make mistakes in this area, can't God still use us? Let me be clear here. The absolute answer to this question is yes. God can and does bless us even when we choose against Him. I feel like in some ways, this is like the story of my life, like choosing the wrong thing, but God turning it out for good all the same. But it's important for us to understand that these decisions still matter. We're not promised that God will save us from the consequences of these decisions. We may have to live with the choices that we make. And so while we should always be focused on what God is putting in front of us and not obsessed with the mistakes we've made in the past, we need to respect the power of the gift that God has given us to make meaningful choices. And so we should make decisions based on both physical and spiritual reality. We should learn about and learn to value spiritual things and bring those into our choices. We should remember that no hunger is worth trading out your role in God's plan. This is often, we're all going to find ourselves in this place where we've got a choice between a soup and our birthrights. And the birthright might be something like your walk with God. It could be a friendship. And the soup could be anything, anything temporary, anything that seems so good right now, that seems beneficial right now, but is going to compromise the better and the bigger thing. No hunger is worth trading out your role in God's plan. Remember, God satisfies hunger. God says, seek first the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 6:33, and all the things that you need, food, shelter, all that, these things will be added to you. God will take care of you. He will meet your needs. You do not need to trade out your role in God's plan for whatever it is that you want right now. And then also don't focus, like I said, on your past mistakes, but trust God with your future. Paul says in Philippians 3, brothers and sisters, I don't consider myself to have taken hold of God's purpose for my life yet. He says, but one thing I do, I forget what is behind and I strain forward to what is ahead. Yeah, the Christian life is forward-facing. We're not supposed to obsess about our mistakes. God can use even the worst of decisions and ultimately bring things about for good. The safest thing that you can do with your life right now, if you know that you've messed up, is to just throw yourself on God's mercy and to put your faith in God to use you and to bless you despite the things that you've done. So we don't need to be obsessed with the past. We can trust in God's grace. But again, we should be sober-minded about the choices that we're facing right now. And finally, remember this, the power of free will works both ways. It's not just a power to potentially mess up our whole lives. It's also power to bless other people. It's the power to serve God. It's the power to make choices that will change other people's eternities. And so when you live each day, don't live like someone who's just lost in the current of life. Live like someone who can make choices that will completely change the outcome of your life and the outcome of the lives of people around you. Bring God into your thought process, and you're not just going to be worried about dodging the bad decisions. You're going to be excited to make consequential good decisions that will impact this world forever. Anyway, that's all that we have for tonight about Jacob and Esau. I'm really excited. This is Welcome Freshman Week, so if you're a freshman watching this who couldn't come to CT for some reason, welcome. We're so glad to have you. Can't wait to see you next week. But if you're in a small group discussing this or thinking about this, why don't you kick around this question? What should we do when struggling with regret over past decisions? It's a good thing to think about. I think a lot of us can relate to that. Anyway, that's all we have for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys soon.